started. So welcome everybody. I appreciate you taking the time to join my second town hall. Tonight will be mostly about answering your questions, and we'd encourage you to ask as many questions as you'd like. This is all about doing two things tonight. One is to help you all get to know me a little bit better and understand where I stand on things that are important to you. And more importantly, it's about me to learn more about what's important to all of you so that hopefully I can do a better job as your director after the election is done. Again, I'd like to introduce two folks on my team, Phil Temples, K9HI, who's the current vice director, and Rob Lydon, who has a resume that's longer than anyone I've ever seen in the ARRL. I've served as club president, section manager, all kinds of things. They're going to be helping me to make sure I field all your questions. I'd like to begin with just a quick intro of what I'm trying to do, what I think is important. Maybe this will help you all set the stage for some of your questions. The ARRL and amateur radio are facing a lot of important issues, and quite a few of these issues are becoming urgent. As director, I think it's important that we be equipped to cover the entire base of things that are concerning ARRL members and that amateur radio is facing. And I'm going to talk with you a little bit in a minute about how I propose to do that. But what I wanted to do was put a few things up here to start the discussion that I think are big issues. Issues that, if we address them effectively, will help solve a lot of the underpinning problems that the ARRL faces, that amateur radio faces. First and foremost on this list for me is the focus on bringing new people of all ages into amateur radio. And you know, that needs to be a joint effort between the ARRL, your director, and all of you. Folks don't decide to join the ARRL and then become active in amateur radio. They become active in amateur radio because they hear about it publicly, or they know somebody who's a ham that lives near them, and they get an introduction to all that amateur radio can bring. It's also very, very important that when folks decide to get licensed and join amateur radio, that they can reach out to mentors. Again, a function that usually is mostly provided by clubs and individual hams that are close by to them. A close second to the need to bring new people into the service is we need to create a much better public support and agency support and awareness for amateur radio. This is fundamental on so many fronts. It's necessary if we're going to get bills passed to protect our rights as ham. It's going to be necessary to influence the FCC to protect our spectrum. If we want to continue to provide public service and emergency communications backup for agencies, it's going to be critical for that aspect as well. A lot has been said about communications and, quite frankly, just basic trust in the ARRL. I think that communications is a two-way street, and it's actually more important to do the listening and acting side of communicating than the publicizing and explaining part. I think this is one of the areas where the ARRL needs to be improved. I think things like this town hall are important ways that we can get input from all of you, hear your concerns, make sure we understand, and also kind of have a deep enough understanding that we can be prepared to act on them. Also, very closely related to the first two topics, it's very important that we engage young people in amateur radio. This is something that we seem to have lost the art of doing. You know, back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, particularly in the 70s and 80s, it was pretty common to involve young people in amateur radio through scouting, through work in schools and other venues. And we seem to have lost the ability to do that. This area is something that I personally put a great deal of effort into in the past 5 years, and I believe it's something that I can provide some leadership for the ARRL to focus more on than it currently does. And then lastly, and I guess this one is a little bit unique, but I believe that a director should have two roles. The first role is they need to help the ARRL set policy, strategy, and deal with the internal operations of the ARRL to make sure it serves its members and that it is effective at protecting and growing amateur radio. But there's a second role that I think is also important. You know, the director has a pretty big podium. They can bring people together in the division, club presidents, section managers, folks on the volunteer field staff, and just individual hams who care about amateur radio and want to make a difference. And part of what I view the role, an important role of a director, is to do that, encourage those people to work together to create programs and tools that solve problems, share ideas that work, and build some of the solutions to our problems at sort of, I guess you'd say, a grassroots level, rather than just relying on the ARRL staff alone to do all that work. In order to attack a really broad range of issues, one person cannot do that alone. I spent many years as a business executive and leader with running some very large organizations, some of them with thousands of people and a lot of money at stake. And every single one of those situations, I've been able to surround myself with a team of people whose backgrounds and skills complement mine and be able to solve a broad range of problems. We're still building our team, but I wanted to introduce some of the players to you tonight. Phil, who is on here, of course, our current vice director. Corey Gullab, who is the assistant section manager and involved in traffic management in Maine. Larry Craneson, a club president, a pretty high-profile individual in that domain. Rob Macedo, who's very active in emergency communications areas and is sort of Mr. Skywarn for New England, I think. Marcia Ford, who is very central to traffic handling here in New England. She's also served many roles in field staff and in both Eastern and Western Massachusetts. Rob, who you've already met, who has a very long resume of work as both a section manager and president of several radio clubs. Ray LaJoy, who's the current section manager for Western Massachusetts. And someone who you probably haven't heard of, Jack Ciacia, who recently came here from Colorado, where he had a very instrumental role as section manager and really did some great work to modernize the area's activities out in his section. So these are just some of the people who are working with me to develop policy. We spend pretty much every day some time on an instant messaging system discussing all kinds of issues that are in front of the ARRL, and folks are helping me to create good positions and well-informed policy around all of these topics. So with that, I have a little bit more, which I'll share at the end, but I think it's probably time for us to start the Q&A. So let's do that. And again, to ask questions, just go ahead and bring up that Q&A block at the bottom of your Zoom window and send them on in, and we'll answer them as we go.
I'll take the first one here, Rob.
Okay.
For Fred, it's from Cheyenne. Hi, Cheyenne, a long time no talk, an old buddy of mine. Thanks for your time tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the town hall. My question is, do you have a plan for closing the gender gap in amateur radio?
Big issue, Cheyenne. Thank you for asking this. This is about, when I always get asked this question, I like to share a little bit of perspective. You know, I do a lot of work in schools, and I get to see what the makeup of the next generation of amateur radio operators looks like. You know what I see? When we do a contact with a space station or we introduce amateur radio to a STEM club, I see more women than men. I see a very diverse group of individuals from all different kinds of backgrounds. And what that tells me is, if we're going to attract that next generation of hams, we need to make sure the current generation, at least the leadership, looks more like the people we're trying to attract, or we're not going to have much of a chance. So how do you get that done? Well, I think that one important way you get that done is you need to sensitize clubs and organizations to the importance of appointing a diverse set of leaders. One of the things that I did in the radio club that we managed is when it came time to think about how we would attack the problem of getting young people engaged, we appointed a young woman to be on our board to be the representative and speak for how we could best address young people and young women particularly to interest them in amateur radio. I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end, but I also have a plan to appoint some assistant directors to focus on some key areas, and I would very much like to see diverse candidates take some of those roles. You have to get the leadership to walk the talk. And if we really believe that a diverse representation of hams is important, and I do believe that, the only way that you can demonstrate that commitment and hopefully lead others to do it is to start at home. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Cheyenne. Over to you, Rob.
Okay, thanks. Ray LaJoy asks, during the campaign, Fred, you were asked about many issues facing the league. How would you prioritize your agenda to start your term in 100 days?
Yeah, great question. You know what? I have a chart here where I'm going to talk about the plan I have for the first 100 days. Let me just see if I can share that. Hold on a second here. I didn't quite do that right. There we go. All right. So, a little bit of background on the first 100 days. I've served as a business executive for about half to 3/4 of my working life. And every time I got one of those jobs, some of them were pretty big jobs, they came with a simple understanding that I had about 100 days, a little over 3 months, to demonstrate that I could do the job and get results, or I would be replaced by somebody who could. Being a director is a pretty important job. And so the way I decided to handle this is I created a 100-day plan and published it, which is my commitment to all of you of what I intend to get done and what my priorities are going to be coming right out the chute. So first off, it's important to build and find common ground with the other board members in order to build a basis to get things done. I've already begun outreach to several board members and members of the senior leadership team that's part of the board at the league, and I will cover every single one of those individuals, look for common ground, make sure I understand what they're trying to do, and see if we can't work together to start getting some things done. Communications is going to be very, very important. I talked about the role of these town halls. I'm planning to hold at least 4 cabinet meetings a year, even though there are only 2 board meetings a year. And every single one of those cabinet meetings is going to begin with a readout on what we heard from all of you in the last town hall, as well as on social media and other sources online. And that's what's going to set the stage for what we work on in my cabinet meetings. And that's what's going to set the stage for what I work on as your director. That's how you do responsive communications that's focused on listening and acting, as opposed to explaining why you did what you did, after the fact. In order to create some real focus inside the division and develop some of those homegrown projects and collaborations that I talked a minute ago about, I'm going to initially appoint 4 assistant directors. One that's going to be about mentoring and new ham development. One director who's going to focus on youth outreach and STEM learning through amateur radio. One that's going to focus on emergency communications and public service activities. And the 4th assistant director will focus on promoting use of and protecting our spectrum in all ways that we can. We'll probably have additional assistant directors appointed as we go to work on projects and programs and encourage people to coordinate across the division and solve some of the problems here in New England that we could and take those solutions back in the ARRL. And then lastly, I have been to 30 club meetings since the middle of June. And I've used that time to do 2 things. One is to understand what folks in the division, particularly in clubs, thought was important, what their concerns were, and also to try to begin motivating club presidents and members to work on some of these initiatives, particularly on bringing new people to amateur radio mentoring and work in schools. And I don't think that you can do the kind of work that a director needs to be doing unless you stay in close touch with people. And clubs are sometimes the easiest way to do that because they're regular gatherings of groups of members. And so I'm going to personally commit to attend at least 6 club meetings a quarter. I'm going to expect each of my assistant directors to do the same. And if people stay on Zoom, I could probably make that number at least 4 times bigger. So these are some of my priorities for the first 100 days or so of my administration.
Alan Pitts, W1AGP, who was actually the former head of public relations at ARRL, wrote us. And he says, many things have changed in the past 8 years. First, we had a very active core of about 250 public relations people all across the country. Some were officially appointed PIOs, and an equal number were self-appointed. They all contributed significantly, as both then and now, quote, all news is local. But a lot of them have disappeared. I believe a lot of the reason for their absence, along with their publicizing ham radio actions, is because there's not been anything to support them with the idea generators like Talk in a Box, PR 101, and dozens of others. We'll skip to his question. He asks, how can the ARRL redevelop a core of public information people around the country and also give them new resources to work with, resources that are free to the members for their use in their communities?
Yeah, boy, this is a really good question, Alan. Thank you for asking it. So first of all, the ARRL has two key open positions that need to be filled with top-notch people, and they need to be filled quickly. One is for a public relations and outreach manager, and the other is for, I believe the title is Director of Social Media Strategy. Okay, both very important. These people need to work to rebuild that network that we once had of folks who can do public relations work. Now, let me just make this a little bit personal. One of the things that we've done really well, and I thank my team greatly for this, is they've been very active in helping me get the word out on what I'm trying to do as director on social media, on groups, IO groups, on Facebook pages, on club websites, all over the place. And that's an example, I think, on a smaller scale of what you're talking about. Each section has a role called a public information coordinator. I think it's very, very important section managers focus on filling that position with people who are committed to doing this kind of work. Because if, let's say that the ARRL wants to get a message out, they need to rely on those PICs to touch all the right places in their division to get the information where people can see it. There's no one person at headquarters that can handle that on a national basis by themselves. That network of folks who can communicate, who will go to meetings, ham fests, and other events, understand what the ARRL is trying to get out there, and do an effective job using not only conventional media, but social media as well to do it is extremely important. I also think training is going to be essential here. You know, a lot of hams that I've encountered, individuals as well as folks in clubs and other groups and the section's field staff, they want to use social media, but they really don't know how to approach that effectively. I think lifelong learning would be a great place to develop some online content, and I hope that our director of public relations will take, our manager of public relations will take that task on early and make sure those training resources are available to all the folks, both the PICs and the sections, as well as just individual hams who want to help. And lastly, and most importantly, we need a good strategy for what we're trying to accomplish in the public domain. You know, we've seen initiatives like, for example, excellent proposals to modernize the technician license and add HF privileges to make it more meaningful for new hams, fall pretty much on deaf ears because the ham radio community didn't understand it. Many people publicly opposed it. And as a result, the FCC said, you all are not agreeing on what we need to do, we're not going to act. That, in my mind, is a tremendous public relations failure. We should have been able to create that kind of alignment before that proposal ever hit the FCC, so it got the kind of warm welcome it would have needed to push it over the goal line. Those are examples of having sound public relations strategies where you know what you're trying to accomplish and you do things in the right order to make sure that your PR team, including the folks in the field, can effectively help you to get those things done.
Rob, you want to take the next question that was sent in?
Okay, I'm going to skip down to David Weiss, N1DOU's question, who says that his ham radio experience has included digital communication. Back in the days when we were talking about packet radio and it took many hops to get anywhere. And he's recently been active in the traffic passing in the national traffic system. And he asks, How can we enhance the national traffic system to be more aggressive with modern technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I spent some time with Marcia Ford, who's involved in traffic handling here in New England, to get some advice on this stuff. Let me tell you what I learned and where that went. First of all, there are digital traffic handling networks. Some of the classical ones use a protocol called PACTOR. And unfortunately, the problem with PACTOR particularly on the HF bands, where this stuff is quite useful for long distance messaging, is those modems are upside of $1,000 to $1,700. They're unaffordable, mostly because of IPR encumbrances that they have. The good news here is there are some new standards that are based on open software protocols, VERA, RDOP, that are applicable, and also the WinLink lightweight version that works with these protocols to send email on the HF bands that give us great hope about having cost-effective solutions so many more hams can participate in digital messaging activity. If you look at a long-term strategy for emergency communications, our disasters are beginning to manifest themselves on a broader footprint. All you need to do is look at the cyber attacks on the gasoline pipelines that affected most of the East Coast to see good examples of how we can maybe need in the near future wide area emergency communications capabilities. Let's say that cyber attack had been directed at a key part of the internet instead of a pipeline. How would people have communicated? Well, the answer is that the national traffic system can easily be able to serve as a backbone to help bridge areas and other emergency communications folks that are being affected in individual areas by a disaster like that. And it's very, very important that some of that messaging be able to be digital and be able to function at fairly high volumes with high accuracy. Doesn't mean that we should replace the NTS system. There is always an important role for voice-based communications and Morse code-based communications as kind of the process of last resort. If we have a big enough attack that some of the computer infrastructure that underpins or maybe are the outlets for some of the digital mechanisms might not be as reliable as we would hope they would be. And so those basic mechanisms are always going to be important, I think. But I do see that the traffic handling system needs to become an integral part of the strategy for emergency communications in the future.
This question actually doesn't come from one single individual, but a lot of club members have asked me and others about ARRL leadership. How does it work? How does it relate to radio clubs? In particular, what does a section manager do versus what a director does? Can you elaborate on that, Fred? And also, for that matter, this one's near and dear to my heart. What's the difference between an assistant director and a vice director?
There you go. All right, wow, there's a lot to unpack there. All right, well, let's start out with the role of the section manager and the director. The ARRL runs on the idea of having a volunteer field staff that does emergency communications, traffic handling, works with affiliated clubs to support them, works with local governments in kind of a liaison role, works with the public to do public information work. That's what, for example, the public information coordinator does. There are also folks on the field staff who coordinate work with young people and in schools. The section manager's job fundamentally is to assemble that team, to appoint those individuals, help them, train them, mentor them, make sure their efforts are well coordinated. They basically are the ones that create the field staff team that does all the heavy lifting for the ARRL. That's their fundamental job. The director's role is to help the ARRL or to lead the ARRL in setting policy and strategy. The directors set the budgets for the headquarters organization. They are heavily involved in the process of selecting a CEO when that job needs to be done. They should be worried about and responsible for a strategic plan for the ARRL, something that has lapsed and probably needs more attention than it's getting now. And I think the director, although this is not necessarily written down, has an opportunity to make sure that the ARRL is responsive in listening to the members in their division and trying to act on member concerns. That's kind of where the bridge between listening to the membership and the policy role that the director play come together. A good director, I think, does a lot of listening to their members and trying to formulate policy and align the rest of the board and the ARRL around policy that supports what their members are concerned about and think needs to be done. And the director also has the opportunity to bring people together in their division, including the field staff, the section managers, and others, to share ideas across sections, build upon programs and tools and so on that maybe one group of folks is ahead of others on or has good ideas about how to do. So hopefully that kind of answers that question. What was the second part again?
The second question had to do with assistant directors versus the vice director.
Right, got it. So the ARRL acknowledges the role of the vice director. And fundamentally what the vice director does is they serve together with the director to do the policy setting role. And they're also a very important backup in case something happens to the director. Maybe the director gets sick or something happens in their personal life that they unexpectedly can't do the job anymore. The vice director would immediately take over for the director and fill out the term. Beyond that, it's very important that a director and a vice director be a good team and they work together. You know, these are big jobs, and you've already seen kind of my approach to building a team around me to do this work. The vice director's the first among equals on that team. And I can tell you that with Phil as being vice director, I can think of no person that I would rather have in that role or that I've been able to work better with in the ARRL organization than Phil. He is an excellent individual and a very skilled person at navigating all the ins and outs of the operation of the ARRL and getting things done. So I'm very fortunate there. So what do assistant directors do? That's really up to the director. Some directors don't appoint many assistant directors. Some don't appoint them at all. Some look at them as an administrative staff, people who can run meetings or coordinate things. I guess my model of this is a little different. I know that I alone can't lead everything that needs to get done on the inside of the division. You saw kind of the focus areas, things like new ham development, and other things that I want to appoint assistant directors to do. These will be the folks who will bring, along with me, the field staff, the section managers, club presidents, and individual ARRL members together to share ideas on how we can solve these problems. And there are two important outcomes from that. One is that helps me make better policy because it ensures that I have a steady stream of information and ideas that are working. The second thing it does is it allows us to create programs here in New England that we can make work and trial on a pretty broad basis across all the sections in the division, and then take them back into the ARRL and say, ARRL, please promote these, share the ideas across the whole United States, and maybe make some of them into ARRL programs that we started. It's faster, it's more efficient, and you know the most important part of that approach? You don't have to worry about the people that you need to do it buying in, because if they create it, they're already brought in. And something I think that the ARRL could learn some great lessons from. So I'm hoping to make that an integral part of what we do. And the assistant directors are going to be a key set of players that are going to help me make that happen.
Does the ARRL director need to be experienced in dealing with the FCC or with other government agencies? I think they're asking about Washington experience, in other words.
Yeah, I got it. Yes, I think that's very important. You know, there's a lot of interest to get the FCC to do things to enhance amateur radio and to stop making it worse for us. For example, we just lost a key band in the 3 gigahertz range to other purposes. I spent a good part of my working life serving on something called the FCC Technical Advisory Committee. That was a group of industry experts who worked directly with the FCC to help the FCC set policy. So yes, I have a lot of experience in working in that domain and actually seeing how the FCC goes about making policy. I think that's a real asset. Not every director obviously is going to have that opportunity or that experience, but I think it's a great asset because it helps me to gauge what's practical to get done in the FCC and, quite frankly, how difficult it will be to get it done. What I'd also tell you is that experience has taught me that the notion that we are going to lobby our way through legislation and things we want in the FCC is not realistic. And let me explain to you why that is. Now, when I sat on the FCC TAC, 3/4 of that were the telecom operators in North America: Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, wireless operators, cable people, and so on. I looked this up. In 2019, that group of individuals spent $67 million lobbying at a federal level for their causes. If you say that the only people we need to worry about, which is, by the way, not true, but let's say you only worried about the top 3 operators who have mobile properties, AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. They spent about half that amount of money, roughly, let's say $34 million, $33 million. If the ARRL tried to match that level of spending, in 18 months, the ARRL would be bankrupt. And so the notion that we can fix this by lobbying is just not realistic. Also, these people are motivated by 2 things: money and votes. We just talked about the money piece, and we know we don't have that. Votes are, more importantly, public support and concern over issues is the path that we need to leverage. Okay. And by the way, you can buy all the breakfasts you want for senators and FCC reps, but if you do not have public support, you will not get anything done. And if you do have public support, the breakfasts are nice, but you can skip those. Okay. I've seen that in action inside my work in the FCC. And so, how do we do that? Well, first of all, this goes back to the discussion on public relations. A key part of the ARRL strategy needs to be building public support that will impact the decisions that the FCC and federal agencies make, okay? And that needs to be a coordinated strategy that involves the membership, the field team, public officials, and others who can influence folks. We also have a seat on the FCC TAC. The ARRL does. I worked with that individual when I was there, and that person needs to be part of the strategy and be prosecuting it actively. You know, I did strategic planning for a major telecommunications corporation for Lucid Technologies for a lot of years. One of the things we always did is we had a set of strategic priorities that we were trying to get done, and we had a saying for it. We said we put all of our wood behind a few arrows. And what that's about is you need to have everybody in the organization, your lobbying team, your public relations team, and as much as you can, your members who are in a position to exert public influence and pressure. Understand what those priorities are, be aligned about them, and working together to prosecute them. That's how you get stuff done, especially when you don't have the kind of deep pockets that your opposition has. So as far as other experience, I'll just share one of my major roles in Lucid Technologies is when Lucid merged with Alcatel, a French company. It was my responsibility to get that merger through something called CFIUS approval, Committee on the Foreign Investment in the U.S. That required me to work with every executive branch agency, Homeland Security, FBI, Justice, DOD, CIA, to create alignment around a very concerned set of individuals about how that might affect the security of the U.S. telephone network. And I can tell you, from having spent almost 2 years building that alignment and creating what those agencies called the flagship model for how you do this sort of stuff, I have lots of experience in Washington, D.C. and how to influence people.
I have one that actually is personally very important to me regarding clubs and club activities, Fred. Special service clubs exist to document those that provide more than just the basic level of services to their members and the public.
Yep.
Right now, the reward system for becoming a special service club, as I recall, is you get to have a DXCC card checker
Yeah,
for
that's
your club.
pretty
And
weak.
I believe that and a certificate is about what the recognition includes.
That's right.
Can you imagine maybe doing something more in the way of rewarding clubs that have achieved that level of service?
Yeah. By the way, this is something that's really important. I'll just tell you all a story. Many of you probably know I've been president of a turnaround situation with a club called the National Radio Society in New England. The club, maybe 7 years ago, when I took the helm, was faltering, had only a handful of members left, and most folks were inactive. One of the first things we did to rebuild ourselves is we worked at and became a special service club. And we actually used that blueprint to define a lot of the programs that we then created and made successful going forward. Today, that club has, I believe, some 450 members and is one of the largest clubs in New England. So I very much believe in the special service club model and what it can do because I've seen it work in my own situation. So what can we do? Well, first of all, it would be really nice if when I went on the website to look up clubs, I could tell which ones were special services clubs. That's a very simple thing that the ARRL needs to fix immediately. Okay.
You know, that nomenclature used to be on there, Fred, but it did disappear. You're right.
Yeah, I looked again today. It's definitely not there. Secondly, the special service club program encourages clubs to be very broad in their service, encourages them to have networks, to do emergency communications work, to train new hams, to do mentoring. There's a whole range of stuff that figures into that application. You can go online and Google or search for a special service club application on the web, and you can see what all goes into it. We need a platform where the special services clubs not only can be noted that they are, but can tout and kind of make visible their programs. One of the things I would like to see us do, for starters, Phil has an excellent division website where we create all kinds of information. I think we should have a list of special service clubs in New England that are on that website and maybe give them each a little bit of space to talk about the top programs they offer as a special service club. That will help those clubs attract more members. You know, folks, when they look to join a radio club, they want a club who's active and is going to give them options to do the things they enjoy in amateur radio. I think the league could maybe do a special service club spotlight each month to say, pick out one special service club and put it in QST for a program that they're being particularly innovative on. You know, people, if you make their good work visible, will do two things. One is more people will want to be in that group of people that are being recognized for the good work they do. And it also gives everybody a chance to see some of the things that maybe the clubs who are leading on certain fronts are doing successfully and maybe build on those ideas. That goes right back to the idea that I have of trying to have the assistant directors bring groups together to share successful programs. I think the special service arena could be a great place to build some of that out. But yeah, special service clubs are really important. They're a great way to reinvent your club too, by the way. If your club is struggling and you go in and follow the model of the kinds of programs that a special service club is looking for and work on developing those, use that as a roadmap to build your club, you will find that you have a very strong club when you're done with that process, in addition to having a nice certificate to hang on the wall.
He's in.
Hello, Jack.
Yes,
Yeah.
What's your question tonight?
Okay. My question has concerns regarding the QST magazine itself. I've seen it go through recent iterations of from very technical to not so technical, and somewhere in between at this point. But after all, you look at it, the content is not very conclusive in any particular area. They got a quarter of the magazine is being brought back to rehash old QST magazines. Very small technical area. a few items of club situations, but I just think that is something lacking in the flagship media piece that the ARRL puts forth. Any thoughts on how that might be improved?
Yeah, good question. And, there's a number of things bound up in that. So first of all, most of the content that I think hams enjoy the most in QST are articles that are written by hams and that are ARRL members. I've written several articles for QST, and, the process could be made easier to do. And I think that it would be great if we had some training, maybe in the Lifelong Learning Network or some other venue, for people who wanted to be QST authors to maybe get some guidelines on how to go about that, how the editing process works, how to prepare the material and submit it, how to pick topics that are likely to enjoy wide enough interest to get published. So a lot of good work can be done there, I think. I also think that, and I've actually lobbied for this, that we should have a mechanism for individuals to create content and contribute it online more effectively as well. I know that the folks that edit QST are very proud of their work. They set very high standards, but there's a lot of good information that could be easily shared in blogs and in other formats that would make the publication process more accessible to all of the members in the division. I write several blogs. Probably the one that's most noted is something called stationproject.blog. It's about amateur radio station building. I've had others contribute articles to my blog from time to time, and it's a much easier and more accessible format for folks to create content. And if the ARRL is going to continue as an information resource, in other words, evolve from being a magazine and a book publisher to maybe a more broad-based source of information about amateur radio, we are going to have to master the art of member-generated content and get really good at that. If you look at some of the YouTube folks that are experts at this, that actually run a business even around regularly producing video content and so on, it's very professional work. They're obviously trained individuals. You could go online and get training on how to do that. I think the ARRL needs to provide some of those tools to us, and probably a great place to begin is to get a lot more people involved in contributing content to QST. As far as technical information goes, and this question's come up before in other forums, I do think more technical content would be helpful, but we also need to be aware of two things. One is a lot of the new folks that are entering the amateur radio service are not engineers and are not nearly as technically oriented on average as that situation would have been 20 or 30 years ago, okay? So it's a tricky balance for the folks that publish QST and on the air and so on to strike the right combination of articles for all of us who are engineers, and I am an electrical engineer, so I appreciate that technical content, I enjoy it, and folks who maybe are a little less technical and just learning how to access the hobby. And so it's not an either or, it's the right balance of both, I think. And to your point, some of that content that maybe some hams would view as filler could be better applied to creating that balance, I think. Something else I think that would help a lot, people like to write for things that they read. The ARRL needs to find a way to make it so that we can get print copies of more than just one thing. I would take On the Air magazine along with QST in a heartbeat if I could get both in my mailbox, and I'd pay extra for that just to see what's going on there and maybe get some ideas generated to contribute there. I'd also say that this might be an opportunity for a division project. Imagine if we got half a dozen people in New England who've written articles to put together a training course to explain how to go about it and shared that across the whole division. That might be a real useful resource. Who knows, maybe Lifelong Learning would pick that up and maybe it would become the ARRL training course. These are the kinds of things that I want to do with sort of the outlook working role of the assistant directors here in the division. When somebody sees an issue that needs to be solved, let's see if we can bring some people together and solve it.
Fred, I was hoping you could clarify something for me. I heard recently that members now have access online to all of the publications.
That's correct.
Is that in fact the true statement, or do we have to select which ones we can see?
You can see them online. You have to log into the ARRL website to do it. The problem is that many of us are old school folks that process printed things better than online content, especially for things that are longer form content like you would see in magazines. It can be a little bit more challenging for some folks to sit at their computer and read a 4 or 5 page article than it is to read, a thread on a group's IO or an email, right? And so I would like for the folks who really process information better when they can hold it in their hands, and I think many people do, that they could more easily get online publications, or at least maybe print out those online publications and look at them and consume them that way or something. I also think the notion of having an environment where folks can write articles, maybe with some light touch editing for length, content, and quality, would be a great resource. I've been lobbying some of the folks down at the league for a while now to try to look at creating something like that. And I believe there is an effort going on to try to revitalize the web platform that the league uses. I think that would be an excellent feature to see in that platform.
Yeah, hopefully when the new IT director arrives, he'll be able to do something.
Another key role that needs to get filled. I'll tell you what, I have a little bit in wrap up here that I just want to kind of share here. I think these town halls are very important. We're going to pop up a survey for all of you at the end. It's pretty simple. It's only 4 or 5 questions, one of which is, do you think we should continue this process, and would you participate if we do? I really believe that the ARRL will go a long way to improving your support if we have an open dialogue where you can ask questions that are on your mind and get honest, candid answers, even if they're not perfectly thought out. And sometimes that dialogue is a way for leaders to really understand, internalize, and think about things that they probably should be thinking about anyway. So that process is very healthy and very important. I also think that it's important that we not only listen to your feedback, but we try and act on it. And you've got some idea of how I'm going to propose to go about doing that. I had, in one of my roles, I was responsible for setting the agenda for a pretty diverse industry board. Again, in the telecommunications space, there's an organization called ADIS, which is a group of North American telecom and wireless operators that also has all of the telecom equipment vendors in the world on it. My job there as something called the Technical Operations Council Chairman was to work across that entire board, find common ground that everybody that was participating would work on, and start and prosecute and complete projects to improve the situation for the members of that board. I think that experience is very relevant to what needs to be done by a director in the ARRL, and in some ways maybe more challenging even than this one was. And lastly, if you want to learn more about me and my background, you could go to elect.ab1oc.org. We did record this town hall, and we'll put it up on the website along with the first one. And lastly, I just want to say a few words about why I'm doing this. Had it not been for the team of people that you saw earlier in my presentation, I would not be running for your director. To become your director. Those folks came to me and asked me if I would consider doing this to see if we could take some of the programs that we'd already made successful in New England or in the New Hampshire area and make them successful at a New England level, and also help move the ARRL in that direction as well. That's why I'm here. I am retired. And I am doing this for one simple reason. When I was a young man growing up in a rural community in Pennsylvania in a pretty poor family, I had an uncle who introduced me to shortwave listening, electronics, and amateur radio. And that set me on a path to become an engineer and a leader and pretty much enjoy all the success professionally in my life that I've managed to obtain. It changed my life. And I've seen amateur radio change lives for other people. I see it with the kids that I touch in schools. I see it with many of the new hams that we've been able to license and train. And I know from talking to so many of you that you all have those stories too. To me, that's the #1 reason why we need to protect and advance amateur radio. And that's what I want to do with the rest of the time I have on this earth. So hopefully you'll give me your support. and enable me to do that for New England, and I very much look forward to serving you in that role. So with that, if there are no final questions, we'll give one last chance if anybody has a closer. I want to thank you all for turning out. 73, and I hope to see you at my first town hall after the election is over.